Hey everyone, Connie here, and there's this video on YouTube by I'm gonna probably mispronounce this, but Chefrillis Productions. I will link it in the description below. It's called How Voltron Legendary Defender Crashed and Burned. And as you can tell by the title of this video, I'm going to basically be explaining why, even outside of that video, my thoughts on Voltron Legendary Defender went from very good to very bad, to the point in where I will never react to this series again. Where, even though I've finished like most of the series and decided to drop it after the beginning of Season 6, how I will never continue watching Season 6, 7, or 8. And I know this might be a controversial video for those of you who may like this series and like where it went in the final seasons, but just hear me out. I'm also going to explain in this video a couple other, well, I'm not explain, but I'm going to discuss a couple other shows that I will never react to for one reason or another. But I am going to focus mostly on Voltron here at the beginning. So, Voltron Legendary Defender, when I first heard about it coming out, I wasn't super interested because I had no real interest in Voltron, and the entire giant robot thing never really got me. Like, I never really understood the appeal of it. It's like, it's a giant robot, and a lot of times made up of smaller robots. What is the appeal in this? Maybe it's just because I've never been a huge sci-fi fan in general, but yeah, it just never was my thing. But then I heard that there were, I guess, animators and whatnot who had worked on The Legend of Korra. And that caught my attention because The Legend of Korra is, you know, my favorite show. So I decided to check out the series, and I was pleasantly surprised by the first episode of it. It really hooked me in. I really fell in love with these characters pretty much instantly, for the most part. But I'll get to that in a little bit. And I was actually interested in where this story was heading. So I ended up watching through Season 1 and Season 2 and all that. And I think I did reactions right away from the start with this series. Of course, that would be back on the old channel, but still. But I was going through this and I was really enjoying it. Up until honestly, until season, I think 3 or 4. I want to say it's 3 where it really started to have some problems. Basically, the first big problem of the series came with Shiro. And this point really isn't discussed too much in the video that I'm linking you to, that I mentioned at the beginning of this. Oh crap, didn't I? Hold on. There we go. Sorry about that. This wasn't really discussed much in that video I mentioned, the one how Voltron Legendary Defender crashed and burned. But I do want to talk about this topic because this is where I feel the series really started to go downhill. Shiro. After the battle with Zarkon, I believe the one at the end of Season 2, where Zarkon was injured, I believe that's also the same point where Shiro disappeared. He just completely disappeared. Keith had to take over for him. And at this point, I thought that was a good idea. But then they brought back Shiro way too quickly. They brought him back way too quickly, and his arc just kind of fell apart from that. Because he kind of went from this cool, fearless leader archetype, who was also really nice and calm and supportive of his crew, to kind of being this character I really just didn't care about anymore. When you rush that kind of story element, that kind of story arc, with him being lost and all, it doesn't work. With that kind of story, you have to have that take place over time. You have to give it the amount of breath it deserves. It needs to really build. To have him return too quickly invalidates it. And not only that, but after he returned, his character felt like a watered-down version of himself. I know, by the way, I know now a lot of what is revealed and what happens in the seasons past where I watched. So I know the fact that he is a clone or whatnot. But still, he feels really different, like too different for even a clone to feel. He almost feels like a completely different character, like he's a shell of his former self. And I believe he was also being at least partially mind-controlled, if I remember that right. So there is that too, but still, it's too jarring and takes you out of the experience. And the payoff to it, when you find this stuff out, isn't enough. It doesn't work. And in the end, again, it would have worked maybe a little better if he had been gone longer. But then the series just kept going down from there, even besides that. The characters started to get less interesting, except for one. And again, I'll get to the characters in a bit. Except for one, all of the characters got less interesting, and the story took some really weird turns, and just kept changing things up kind of at a whim. There were like points where it's like, oh, we're gonna keep switching up the pilots of the Lions, just like every season or so, pretty much. It's like, okay, so Keith's in charge, then Keith leaves, and then Alora's part of the crew, and then like everything keeps changing. And the thing is, they don't even wear the right colors half the time. That is mentioned in the video. They don't wear the right colors for their lines, and it's really distracting. It's really fucking distracting. And eventually, the characters, like I said, just feel like shells of their former selves to the point where they're just not entertaining or likable anymore. The story gets so jumbled, and then you get to the fact that the villain keeps changing. Like Zarkon, he's pretty much put out of commission for the most part at the end, when he's injured at the end of Season 2. But then it's early on in Season 5, at a really weird point, by the way, that he's killed by his son after pretty much doing nothing for a while. Like, Lotor had become kind of the de facto main villain at that point, and Zarkon was just kind of there. And then Zarkon and Lotor have a fight after Lotor pretends to be friends with Team Voltron, the Paladins, and he kills him. And here's the thing, the idea of Lotor killing Zarkon isn't a bad idea, but the placement of when it happened and all makes no sense. It should have happened much, much earlier, like in Season 3. And I think it would have made sense at the end of Season 3. Not even the beginning, the end of Season 3, because you have to give time for Lotor to actually build as a character still throughout Season 3. But after that, it's like, he's the villain for a while, and then apparently, again, this is from past where I actually watched, he is kind of lost in some quintessence wormhole after going crazy. And then the villain shifts again to that other guy who I don't even remember the name of right now because he's so irrelevant. Seriously. I mean, he was in there from the very beginning, but he's completely irrelevant as a character. No one cares about him. Nothing matters with him. He's not intimidating. He doesn't have a presence. He's not memorable. At least Zarkon was memorable. You remember Zarkon. You don't remember this guy. And then, after that, after Honerva apparently is gone for a while, just kind of biding her time, I guess, she comes back as the main villain, and then it's just redeemed in the end. And everything goes back to normal. Except that Alora, for some strange reason, dies. And yeah, the one... Here's the thing. I knew about most of what happened after I initially dropped the series. I started to hear about everything that was happening, and especially once the final season aired and everything, I started hearing about how it ended and everything. I just watched this video yesterday. So it's like, my thoughts on this were already kind of cemented before I watched this video, and when I'm watching this, it's like I'm hearing obviously more details surrounding it. But my thoughts are pretty much the same for the most part. There are a couple exceptions. But again, I'll get to that. The point is, it started to do so much wrong and never really recovered. It just kept going worse and worse. And you get to the point where it's just not fun to watch anymore. You don't care about the characters anymore. You don't care about the story anymore. And with what happens even after I dropped it, it's like it just progressively gets worse and worse. And it would have been easy to fix. Have Lotor actually be a legitimately good guy, or even at least neutral. Have his working with Voltron not actually be a double cross, and have it so that the only other main villain after Zarkon is Honerva. And that she becomes the main villain because she wants revenge for Zarkon's death after realizing who she actually is. That would have been great. That would have worked. In terms of the villains and how that structure goes down. But instead, they just choose to like change things up way too much. And here's a thing to note. Legend of Korra did this too, but the thing is, each Legend of Korra villain, one was relegated to a single season, it was more structured, and each Legend of Korra villain was memorable, was strong, and had an impact on the story. The only three of the four main villains of Voltron had an impact. Which, I mean, is still majority, to be fair. But even the ones who did weren't all that great. Zarkon, honestly, didn't have enough time to become that great. He didn't have enough time or focus to really be an intimidating, great presence as a villain. Lotor was a little better, but it doesn't work for his character to have that entire pretending to be a good guy arc. I feel like it just didn't work, and it came across as cheesy and completely unbelievable. Like, you guys know, like, almost the entire time he was doing that, I called out that he was tricking them. I had no reason to believe him. There was no reason to believe him. The thing is, when you do an arc like that, where a villain pretends to be a good guy, you have to believe they're a good guy. It has to be believable. Us as the viewers have to believe it. Or it has to be believable enough for the characters to believe it. And it wasn't. Honestly, the fact that the characters believed he was a good guy was completely stupid. It dumbed down our heroes for the sake of the plot. There's no reason they should have trusted him. No reason. And let's talk about the characters. I've already talked about Shiro and how he changed. Let's talk about the others. Keith and Lance. They were my least favorites at the beginning. I grew to like Lance a little more once he started maturing a bit and became less of a dumbass. But then they just really didn't do anything with it. They didn't do anything of any real value with his character. Keith pretty much stays the same. He's completely insufferable. He goes into this entire arc where he works with the Blade of Marmora, or whatever it's called. And it's not interesting in the slightest. Honestly, it was at that point that it solidified his character as my least favorite. It was just that bad and unlikable to watch, unenjoyable. Hunk just doesn't, they don't do anything with him. He doesn't progress, he doesn't develop, he's pretty much the same the entire series. And I mean, he's not bad. I like Hunk. He was one of my favorite characters, one of my top 3. But the fact that he doesn't progress is really annoying. The fact that he doesn't grow or develop is really annoying. Allura is hit with the stupid stick way too often, especially in the later seasons, to the point where it just becomes completely unlikable. And she was one of the most likable characters. She was my number 2 for a long time. But she got hit with the stupid stick so much that it just messed with her entire character. Karan is kind of in the same squad as Hunk. He's pretty much the same at all times. Nothing is really done with him. They don't progress his character at all. He's the same throughout the entire series, and honestly, again, while not bad, it's not enough to just like, oh, we have a good character, we're not going to change them at all. That's not enough. That's not good. But then you get to Pidge. Pidge is the only character who I continue to like the entire time. And I think the reason for that is because she did grow and develop. She went through these good story and character arcs. Her stuff with her brother and father was fascinating and just really well done. When I first watched it all, I was actually thinking it was taking a little too long to actually get to that. But now that I really think about it, I think it was actually paced pretty well in comparison to how long the series is. I think it was handled well enough. And the moments that did come felt really good when they did come. It felt like it was worth waiting for. And her character never felt stale, never felt old. She always felt like she was a good, legitimate, likable character the entire time. But she was the only one. And that's really sad. That's really ridiculous. And then there's the entire shipping thing. Specifically with Clance. Now, I'll say it off the bat, I didn't ship Clance. In fact, I saw no reason to. There was nothing in the story, in my eyes, to connect them together. And here's where I actually disagree with the video that, once again, I mentioned and am linking to in the description below. That video states that Clance was tagged as being gay from the very beginning. That it was coded. Gay-coded, basically. Which just comes down to mean, if you don't know what that means, it basically means that their characters were written to be gay. That their characters were written in a very specific way to where it can't be interpreted otherwise. To where that is how their characters are designed. But I disagree with that strongly. I don't think there was anything there. And that's not the problem that I had with the shipping, though. My problem is that they tried to do romance between certain characters. I did just want to mention the Clance thing because that is a part of the video that I am linking to that I want to discuss. My issue is that they tried to do romance specifically between Lance and Allura. And when I look back on it, I really realize how bad it was. One, Lance and Allura, neither of them should have a romance. In fact, I don't think any of them should. And here's the thing, I shipped certain characters. I shipped Shiro with Pidge, for example. And I'll get to the little real problem with that in a minute. I shipped Shiro with Pidge from pretty much episode 1, practically. Know who I shipped Hunk with that one alien girl he liked. But I also didn't think that that was going to be a focus because I thought that that would have taken away from the story. And from what I can tell, it did. And especially because of Alora's nonsensical sacrifice at the end of the series. But then there is the one thing that really pisses me off, that is the biggest reason why I will never watch any more of this. Not even just react, never watch any more of this. Outside of the whether or not you believe that Keith and Lance were gay-coded, and whether or not you're upset that they didn't end up together. My biggest issue is the queer baiting that this show did with Shiro. And here's the thing. Even before I dropped the series, I knew about Shiro being gay. It was something I was not able to avoid in terms of spoilers. I knew that was a thing. However, I didn't know what they were going to do with it. And now that I do, it's one of the most infuriating things I've seen a series do. So, they hyped up on social media and stuff that, oh, you're going to see Shiro's lover. You're going to see this guy who is Shiro's lover and everything. Right? His significant other. They hyped this up on social media, and then he gets there's 2 episodes with not even 15 minutes worth of content showing him. And on top of that, there's apparently nothing in either of those episodes, in either of those moments of content, that connect him and Shiro as anything more than just friends. There's nothing to connect them romantically. Nothing to show them as even slightly possibly being romantically interested in each other. And then, not only did they queerbait us with that, completely, tricking us into thinking there was going to be actual good representation, then, in the end, apparently in, what all of these characters did after the end of the series, Shiro marries some rando. He gets married to some random guy we've never met. If it was one of the other members of the crew, like Lance or Keith, then that would have been acceptable. If it was a character that we've seen that Shiro had some kind of connection and everything to, that he actually talked to, that we've seen him with, then it would have been okay. It would have been more acceptable. But the fact that it was some random guy we've never seen, had no relevance to the story, and no relevance to the character, it's basically like, oh, we're going to throw in this gay marriage. You're happy now, right? You got representation. It feels so forced and so fake. And here's the thing. LGBT representation in media is something very important to me. As a member of the community, not even both, 3 things. I'm a trans girl, I'm panromantic, and I'm asexual. I am 3 shades of LGBT. And as such, this kind of topic is very important to me, to the point where I actually run a convention panel called LGBTQ+ Representation in Media, where I talk about all these different characters in various cartoons, video games, movies, comics, etc., who are part of the LGBT community, and how they're represented, whether well or not. And I can tell you, when I do this panel next, this will be a negative for me, and I will be discussing this, because this is not how you do representation. No, I'm not saying that you can't have an LGBT character be a bad guy. That much is very possible. As long as you also show that there can be good to the LGBT community, having a little of both, which She-Ra and the Princesses of Power does very well, actually. Even though nothing is technically confirmed, it's super obvious. They imply so much to the point where it's like it can't really be interpreted otherwise. And honestly, I think that there are other shows that have done LGBT characters much better. Legend of Korra being a huge example. But while you can even have bad guys as LGBT characters, that doesn't mean you can write LGBT characters bad. That doesn't mean that just having characters in there who are LGBT makes it good representation. Not all representation is good, believe it or not. There are some fucking assholes in the LGBT community. There are some people in this community that most of the rest of the community hates and try to disown. Even though I think that it's wrong to try and disown them and say, oh, we don't consider you part of our community just because you're an asshole. No, they're still part of the community, and we have to deal with that. We have to deal with the fact that the LGBT community isn't wholly good. And one big example of that would be, what is his name? I cannot think of his name. Oh, it's like I always... Milo. That's it. Milo, and I'm going to butcher his last name. Yiannopoulos? Something like that. But Milo, as you know him, he is absolutely horrible as a person and as representation for the community and just generally. And yeah, he's just really terrible representation, but we can't just deny that he's gay. We can't just like say, oh, he's not part of the community just because we hate him. No, he's still part of the community. And we have to acknowledge that. And we have to not be okay with it, but we have to just admit that he is part of the LGBT community, and that's not going to change. So, yeah, this is an example with Voltron of how you can do bad representation in media. How it's not always good. Puri Puri Prisoner from One Punch Man is another example of terrible representation. How he is the most harmful, toxic, negative walking stereotype of a gay man you can have. And it's just, it's disgusting to see these kinds of characters. Or to see these kinds of things done with characters. Again, the idea of Shiro being gay and everything, and having a former lover would have been great, but they handled it terribly. But I've ranted about this long enough. I mentioned there were a couple other shows I wanted to mention that I will never react to. And these ones aren't ones that I'll necessarily never watch, but I'll never react to them. First, Genlock by Rooster Teeth. Rooster Teeth is one of those weird companies and all where they have only one show that I like. A single show. I have checked out a few of their different pieces of content and stuff. I like none of it. Except for Ruby. I hate Red vs. Blue. And everything else I've seen from them is pretty much, yeah, in my eyes, kind of crap. And I mean, Screw Attack, which is kind of like a sister company of theirs, I guess you could say. I like Screw Attack, and I love the death battles and all from them. But as Rooster Teeth, they've done nothing else that I like. That I know of, at least. And I'm not even saying Genlock is necessarily bad from the episode or episodes that have been released so far. And I'm not saying it's going to be bad as a show. The reason I'll never react to it is I don't want to. I have a lack of interest. I don't even really want to watch it. I just don't care. From what I've gathered, it's a sci-fi mech show that has a bit of a political leaning, as in politics and government and whatnot. All of that has a factor in the story. Those kind of shows or movies or whatnot really don't interest me. Really don't interest me. And even if it ended up being good, it's still not something I would want to react to. Because there's so many other shows out there that would just, I feel, be skipped over if I chose to react to that instead. And not even the great talent in it can help that. I believe David Tennant, of all people, is in it. And I love David Tennant. But that doesn't mean I'm going to love the show, for one. And for two, that doesn't mean I want to react to the show. Same with Michael B. Jordan. Another show I will not react to is BoJack Horseman. And the reason for this is because I have heard that BoJack Horseman, in its general style, is comparable to Rick and Morty. In terms of, like, oh, the main character is a character you're not supposed to identify with, you're not supposed to like, you're not supposed to want to be like. But it's more about the depressive side of an ex-Hollywood star who is just trying to basically get by in life. And that sounds completely abysmal to watch. It sounds depressing, and it sounds just completely unenjoyable. And I've heard that the show apparently is very deep and meaningful with a lot of its lessons and ideas. But in my eyes, deep and meaningful lessons are better in a show that's not in that kind of topic. They're better in shows that are actually more, that have more frivolity and fun, that have more unique joy to it. When you insert those deep, meaningful lessons and ideas into those kind of shows, it means more. When it's like, oh, this is a deep, meaningful show, and so it's going to have these deep, meaningful lessons and moments and ideas, it's like, okay, and what's the big twist? What's the big thing that makes it different than other shows like that? What's the big thing that makes it stand out? But the real reason I won't react to it is because, honestly, it's an adult cartoon. And I use that term very loosely, but that's the only really way to describe it. I can't call it a mature cartoon, because a lot of those adult cartoons aren't mature. Rick and Morty, South Park, and Family Guy as great examples of that. Or American Dad, or Cleveland's House, or whatever the fuck it's called. Shows that either, like Family Guy, are insanely dangerous with their lessons and ideas, and just completely unfunny. Or shows like Rick and Morty that are just shock humor for the sake of shock humor. I don't like those kinds of shows. And I'm not saying that I don't like adult cartoons. I mean, I love Last Man, I love Disenchantment, I love Futurama. There are adult cartoons I do like. But those are the rare ones. And when I react to those, it's like I usually know ahead of time that they're going to be something I'm at least interested in. Most adult cartoons I won't react to on this channel, because most adult cartoons are more in the vein of those which are just bad. In my opinion, of course. Keep in mind, everything I'm saying in this video and everything I'm saying in any video on thoughts on any anime, cartoon, game, or whatever else I happen to talk about at the time, it's all my opinion. If you disagree on any of this, you are perfectly entitled to that. You are perfectly allowed to disagree with me. And I just really wanted to make that clear. But yeah, I wanted to make this video specifically surrounding Voltron after I saw that other video, which again is linked in the description below. But I also wanted to mention these other shows as well, because I want to, like, kind of give a point here. It's not that I'm not going to take risks with watching any show anymore, because there's shows I'm interested in that I have no idea if I'll like or not, that I'm interested in starting reactions to. It's more along the lines of, I don't want to. I honestly, if I'm being completely honest here, don't want to react to those kinds of shows anymore. I've given enough of them a try. And again, if you want to suggest a show and it's an adult cartoon, suggest it. Suggest anything to me, and I'll just tell you if it's something I'm not interested in checking out or not. So it's not that I'm not going to take risks with these shows. I really just don't want to have a chance to watch one of those shows and end up hating it, just like with any of these others. I don't like hating shows. And with those kinds of shows, it's going to be way too much more, how do I put it? It's going to be much more, oh my gosh, my mind is blanking. It's going to be easier. It's going to be much easier to actually like those, or it's going to be easier to hate those shows. And I just don't want to put myself in that situation. And as such, that will eliminate one kind of show from possible viewings at this point. And it's the kind of show that I feel is like Voltron, or is probably like what Genlock is doing. The kinds of heavy sci-fi shows that focus a lot on mechs, futuristic technology, and or deep political structures. I'm just not interested in putting myself through that kind of stuff again. And again, there might be an actual exception to that at some point. There might be one that actually interests me enough to check it out. But right now, I want to veer away from that stuff and go towards the stuff that I really am interested in, the stuff that I really am wanting to see. And again, if you have any suggestions for something for me to watch, no matter what it is, please let me know. Please suggest it. Because even if it's something that I'm not going to end up reacting to, at least it's suggested and at least I know of it. At least I know it's something that is out there. Because that way I can find out about it a lot easier and be able to avoid it as well. Plus, I still want to just hear any and all of your suggestions. Because eventually I will have to fall back on a lot of those. I won't be able to just go with everything, you know? I do have a very limited list. But yeah, I just wanted to make this video to explain all of that. I know it's a long video, almost 40 minutes long now. But I hope you enjoyed it. And I do want to hear your thoughts, even if they differ from mine, especially if they differ from mine. Tell me what you thought of Voltron Legendary Defender and the specific topics regarding it I mentioned. And once again, the link to the video that I mentioned is in the description below, so please check that out as well. It's a great video. Even if you disagree with its points, it's just really well made. So check that out, and thank you so much for tuning in. For now, I'm Connie, and I'm signing off. See y'all next time.